And welcome back to our deep dive series where we continue by looking at the Seattle Seahawks in this episode. Now, the Seattle Seahawks, there's been one or two changes over the offseason for us to talk about, none more so than at quarterback. And the first player we're going to look at is somebody who most of us were pretty high on last season, but Mark refused to budge and was out on him all season until maybe he softened right at the end. Their new quarterback, Mr. Sam Darnold. Over to you, Mark.
I would rather be wrong than change my mind. I think, although there have been some big name changes at Seattle, but big changes, medium impact for fantasy is what I'm thinking, to be honest. And yeah, you're right. We do need to talk about Sam Darnold. And yes, I was wrong on him last year. QB9 after he was drafted ADP QB 30, 9 top 12 finishes, 18.8 points per game. He absolutely paid you back and well beyond if you drafted him. And if you picked him up early enough on the waiver wire in the season, you'd been very, very happy as well. But when it came to top numbers, we only had QB 1 to 6 finishes in 16.7% of games, so 3 games, which is significant. I'll get back to his career long numbers in a minute. 50% of his games, he was a top 12 QB. So it was good. That's what you're expecting around that point. But he was a perfect fit for that Kevin O'Connell system in Minnesota last year, and that was a big part of it. Seattle, much more run-oriented. JSN and Kupp are very, very good. Let's not kind of play them down. Jefferson, Addison as a duo, they are not. I think we need to also be quite clear on that. I think he will still be a solid option as a QB2. If you are in a Superflex league, you could do a lot worse than Sam Darnold as your second quarterback. Single QB, I honestly think we're going to see a regression this year. I think it's going to be a bye-week gap filler at best. I don't think you'll be able to use him as a bye-week gap filler because I think every single league will have someone who is high enough on him to draft him and keep him on their roster. We speak a lot about outliers and how sometimes the perfect formula in a season means that season sits on an island compared to the player's career in general. So last year, 19 games where he had 20 or more fantasy points. In his previous 6 years, he had 11. That shows last year was a massive outlier. What maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all kicked into gear and we have now the formula for Sam Darnold's move forward. If he was still in Minnesota, I could probably buy that. Moving to Seattle, run heavy offense. I just don't see it this year. Am I being negative again, Ed? Am I going to have egg on my face again? Or by saying the same thing repeatedly, do I end up being right eventually?
No, I think it's very fair. I think, will he be a top 10 quarterback this year? I think it's unlikely for the reasons that you've said. There will be a regression. And if he was still in Minnesota, I think he would continue to, on not necessarily a trajectory, but on an even keel. But yeah, people are sometimes, underestimate how difficult it is with a new system, a new offensive coordinator, etc. So yeah, I don't think he will have a similar sort of season. And I don't think it's a hot take to suggest that either. So yeah, Sam Darnold will be reliable, but I don't think he'll be the same sort of fantasy behemoth as he was last year. We've talked about their running game. Who are we going to look at running back?
I'm going to kind of straddle the running game a little minute because a player I've not created a graphic for, but running game does need to be spoken about. And it's probably a bit disrespectful not creating a graphic. I just want to quickly mention Jalen Milroe as well. And it's when you say about running games, why I wouldn't usually talk about rookie backup quarterbacks at all in any of these shows. But if Darnold is absolute toilet and needs benching at any point, if Darnold gets injured, we will be spending a lot of fab on Jalen Milroe because we talk about running game. There could be no better fit for Seattle. I'm really excited about Milroe in the future. We've seen a running quarterback do quite well in Seattle in the past. So yeah, I think if we see anything go wrong for Darnold, we were spending all our fab on Jalen Milroe. But you're right.
You just wanted to say if Sam Darnold is toilet, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Was I obvious? But you're right, though. The running back options are also very, very interesting in Seattle. And we'll start with Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker did exactly what was expected of him. He was drafted as the RB17. He finished as the RB17, but still feels like he had a down season because of the amount of time he missed through injury. He was really solid before he ended up missing some time, 15.9 points per game. Can he build on that in a Clint Kubiak system? I think it's in the range of outcomes. In his 11 games, he had 9 top 24 finishes. That's pretty reliable for a later running back pick. It's got to be said. The thing that really appealed to me last year and appeals moving forward as well, and is for a player that there are lots of reasons to maybe out on. You look at contract, you look at the player behind him, 53 targets and 46 receptions. That is very, very appealing. And if he gets anything like that this year as well, then that will obviously give him that fancy value. And don't forget, he did all of that in only 11 games as well. Late round 4, where he's going at the minute, that seems pretty fair, to be honest. I think you look at other players going around then, I'd quite happy to have him in the way that I draft. I think the way that you can draft as well, you'd be getting him as your RB2 at that point, quite likely. If you were going later on, you run it first running back, probably not quite in zero RB territory, but if you're waiting later that pick, you could also do worse than Walker there as well, I think. What do you think for Walker this season?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Walker. I do end up with quite a few shares of Walker. I think he is just he's consistent, isn't he? He'll get you the numbers, and I don't see a situation where he struggles to be top 20 running back. I know there's a bit of competition there, but yeah, I've always been a fan of Walker.
Zach Charbonnet sits behind him as a player that definitely exceeded his ADP and did really, really well in Walker's absence. Potentially that increased focus on the run could mean they are both very valuable. I think there will be a lot of teams that try to recreate that high volume committee approach that we've seen from the Gibbs Monty model in Detroit. And when you've got a player like Charbonnet as your 2, you've probably got the ability to try to work that in a little bit. Same as Walker, he had a lot of work in the pass game, 42 receptions off 52 targets, only 1 touchdown. If that could creep up and he was a bit more efficient there, that could give him really good value as well. Zach Charbonnet should absolutely be rostered. Zach Charbonnet is going to be difficult to make a case to not start in your flex spot every single week. But it's also going to be very difficult to go into the week feeling confident he's going to pay you back in that situation. But if you pick him up around 10, which is where he's going at the minute, you're picking up for your bench. If Walker misses time, then that is a value pick. There are no two ways about it. You'll be laughing in that situation. Obviously, we don't wish injury on any player, but if I had Charbonnet, I would have an eye on how much work Walker was getting, how much Charbonnet was getting worked into that. Charbonnet could potentially be the player that they roll with moving forward if Walker does move on at the end of his contract year. Once again, we shall see. But I think it's one of the few situations where you could make a case for having either or of these players. I don't think this is a sort of situation where I'd want to roster both of them at all, though.
No, I think Charbonnet last year was a steal, wasn't he? If you got him, 11 points per game is very solid, and if you reduce that this year and you picked him up in the 10th round, again, you'd be absolutely over the moon. He would be a very solid flex option. So, yeah, they won't be Gibbs and Monty, but I think they will both be relevant this year. Are there other options at running back, or are we going to look at receiver next?
No, I'm going to move on. One thing I just want to say, last words on Charbonnet, I want to say is that it's that consistency. So last year, a third of his games, he was a top 24 running back. A third of his games, he was between RB 24 and 36. And a third of his games, he was outside that top 36 entirely. So that is where the danger does come in. And when we speak about consistency, unfortunately, that's where we need to speak about a player that, once again, I really, really like, but struggle to trust for fantasy. And that is Jaxson Smith-Njigba. Just have a look at his consistency of his numbers from last year. So he was a wide receiver 1 in 27.8% of his games, a wide receiver 1 or 2 in 38.9% of his games. He was outside of the wide receiver 3 conversation, so a finish of 37 or lower in 44% of games. And that's what makes him really, really difficult to trust. Now, he finishes wide receiver 9. We've spoken about this with a few players during this. A lot of that is to do with the fact that he just played all the games. There were lots of wide receivers missed time last year compared to previous years. He absolutely paid back on his ADP. I think we were higher than most. We thought he would finish higher than he was being drafted, and he did comfortably so. But it still felt a bit of a tricky season for him last year. Now he's the clear wide receiver 1. Do we have that clarity? Or now that we're going to have a much more run-heavy Seattle, do we lose even more clarity? Target share shouldn't be an issue. You expect he's going to dominate when it comes to the actual share of the targets, but we've just spoken about 2 very competent pass-catching backs as well. I just don't think he is what we thought he might be when he came into NFL, and I don't think he is a top-tier elite wide receiver. Certainly, we've not seen that yet. Could that change this year, do you reckon?
No, he's a classic example of looking beyond that wide receiver 9 finish. And you're exactly right. When you dig a little bit deeper, there were too many bust weeks from a fantasy perspective. If you just look, he was top 10 last year. I can have him as a wide receiver 1 this year. Well, I don't think you can. And I wonder whether wide receiver 14 is even slightly overestimating what he can achieve. He's got that competition from the pass catching backs, and also despite the fact that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett have moved on, he has got competition at wide receiver from a very talented receiver.
And I think, well, before we quickly move on, do you know where he's being drafted at the minute? So saying that my projection of wide receiver 14 is probably at the ceiling, I don't disagree with you there. Where's his ADP at the moment?
I don't know. Are people slightly blinded by that wide receiver 9? Are they, looking at Darnold and thinking he'll have another great season? Is he going similar, like about wide receiver 10?
Wide receiver 12. That feels absolute ceiling. He had 4 top 12 weeks last season. I think I want to see at least 5 to 6 from consistent wide receiver 2. I want to really see 8 or 9 from someone I'm going to pay that high for. And you're right, the competition in town is a big name. It is a big brand. It is Cooper Kupp. Now, Cooper Kupp is a player that is not the Cooper Kupp of old. We know this. I just want to talk about his numbers from the last 3 seasons, because it's not a quick decline for Cooper Kupp. This is a picture that's building up since 2022. So, the last 3 years, 2022, 9 games, wide receiver 23. 2023, 12 games, wide receiver 40. 2024, 12 games, wide receiver 38. It's been a long time since we have seen top-tier Cooper Kupp. But in that period of time, he's still been a wide receiver 1 in a quarter of his games. Players that you are drafting in round 8, players that you are drafting as either your last flex spot or your first bench spot, depending on how large your roster is, they don't have a quarter of chance to finish as in a top 12 position at their position. I do think Cooper Kupp still has that. Will he do that in 5-6 games? Probably not. Has he got a couple of big ceiling weeks and then some consistency around wide receiver 2? I reckon so, and that's why I'm not saying he's going to leapfrog JSN. I'm not saying he's going to be wide receiver 1 in Seattle. But at cost, I think you could do a heck of a lot worse than taking Cooper Kupp in round 8 of your drafts. Current ADP wide receiver 41. If he plays every game, he comfortably exceeds that. It's the if he plays every game is the worry, isn't it? And what condition he is currently in. Run heavy offense, we've said it several times now. That is a concern. But that value I like. And when it comes to boom bust players in your flex, I'm a sucker for that sort of play when it comes to my redraft leagues. So I could see himself targeting Cooper Kupp quite a lot around that point in redraft.
Yeah, I mean, Kupp is someone I never end up with. He always goes a bit too high for my liking. I think over the last few years, that name value has pushed up his ADP, and it will continue to do so. You know, he's got that triple crown year where the Rams won the Super Bowl, which I don't really like to talk about. But yeah, he's got that keeps on ticking over in terms of his reputation. I don't see him being too relevant this year. I worry about his injuries. And as you've said, he's not really done much for the last 3 years. I take your point about when he has played, he's had solid weeks, but I do worry about his age and his fitness. And I probably won't end up with much of Cooper Kupp because he will go a bit too high for me.
Final player we're going to mention at wide receiver, and this is going to be a contender for the quickest conversation we have about a player in the whole series of 32. I want to mention MVS because he's there. He'll have one big week. If you've got him in DFS that week, excellent. If not, we probably won't say MVS again outside of that week. So moving on, if you are joining us at this point, please subscribe, like, and give us a share as well. Maybe even drop a comment below and tell us why Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to be the sleeper pick that we should all be targeting in our redraft leagues this year. I'm going to mention next a player that I have perhaps been high on a couple of years ago, have faded on, and now with a new arrival in the depth chart, and probably moving on from entirely, but a player that I do understand why people could make a case for him to some degree, and that is Noah Fant. I don't think is relevant unless you are really stuck in bye weeks. However, could we see a situation in a run-heavy offense where potentially the first read of a target to your back that's coming out of that field ends up converting to a dump off to the tight end? Maybe, but I think there's a lot of things have got to happen there for Noah Fant to have that fantasy relevance. I think we've probably seen all we can see from Noah Fant. 3 top 12 finishes last year. As we've said before, when it's such a shallow pool, that is not doing anything for you. 7.4 points per game. I'm not really greatly interested. And I don't think he's probably going to be in Seattle next year either, because of the next player up, who was a player that I really enjoyed watching in the pre-draft process, with a lot of question marks too. And as with many rookies, one to watch, that is Elijah Arroyo, showed signs of his potential in 2024. Lots of injuries in his past, but he's got round 2 draft capital. If he manages to take over from Fant, he might have some late season value, but more likely, I think we're talking about Elijah Arroyo this time next year as being a kind of a fringe pick. He's someone that I'm going to keep an eye on, though, for some late season streaming potential. Not a great amount to talk about when it comes to tight ends at Seattle, but I think when we're not going to think many receptions to go around, I don't think we can get that excited about Fant Arroyo, can we?
No, Arroyo is somebody I enjoyed watching in the pre-draft process as well. And it is interesting how much capital the Seahawks have invested in him. So he's definitely the future there. But I don't think either really are going to be on my fantasy radar. I agree that Arroyo might well break out in the season, and that would be exciting to watch.
Do you know what is massively on my radar, though? And for those of you that are watching on YouTube rather than listening on your podcast app of choice, a young man who has decided to, on his forearm, get tattooed a living legend is either got to meet that mantle, or is going to be someone who's signaling my radar to highlight that on a week in, week out basis as not living up to his own tattoo.
A lot of confidence, isn't it, living legend? You'd have thought the tattoo artist might have been, are you sure? You've got a lot to live up to.
If you would like to hear more of my opinion on different tattoo wording players have on them, please do make sure you tune into the Colts episode where I have a very, very strong take on a tattoo that Anthony Richardson has had done during the off-season. But we'll save that for another show. There you go. Head over now. Stop listening at this point. Go and find the cult. Hear me rant about somebody else's body art. I think we're about done there, though, Ed, aren't we? Seattle, there's some potential to get excited about them, but there's also a way that this season falls really, really flat.
Yeah, I don't see them being particularly involved this year. I certainly don't see them as a playoff team. They might have a few exciting matchups, but yeah, they're not somebody I'm looking to go deep this year.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. As we've already said, give us a subscribe, a like, a share. Go and check out our other deep dive shows for each of the other of the 32 NFL teams. But for now, that is all from me. It is all from Ed. Why don't you close the show for us this time, Ed? Call our lift.
Malcolm, please take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.